Tanse, good evening. I'm Chris Sanachkate. Welcome to APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. The Assembly of First Nations National Conservation Gathering wrapped up in Cape Breton on Wednesday. Migma land protectors were given a platform there to speak about protecting Hunter's Mountain. APTN video journalist Angel Moore reports.
At the Member 2 Trade and Convention Centre in the Member 2 First Nation, Unamagi, Migma for Cape Breton, First Nations from across the country gathered to discuss conservation and stewardship. Migma land protectors Cynthia Paul, Roger Tony, and Duma Wilson spoke at the AFN's gathering. Tony invited the crowd to Hunter's Mountain.
It's not a protest. It's a gathering for us land protectors to protect our resources, and we want to keep welcoming everybody to come join us, come eat, come have a tea or a coffee and, chat about it, and even come have a look for yourself to see, the devastation that's happening in our abundance of resources.
Migma land protectors have set up a checkpoint at Hunter's Mountain to take back stewardship and to save the forest from clear-cutting, despite a new provincial law that says it is illegal to block or impede access on forest roads. Terry Dorward is the Conservation Director for the West Coast Indigenous Protected and Conservation Areas. He visited Hunter's Mountain and says he supports the land protectors.
Because the government in Nova Scotia cannot run roughshod on the Migma rights and responsibilities to their land. They're trying to protect a way of life. We're living in the 21st century, and this colonization and these aggressive tactics need to stop.
The land protectors say when treaty rights are violated, it affects all nations.
We're all treaty people, and we've signed this treaty as a whole, and to make it work, we have to work together as a whole, right? The treaties aren't being listened to.
As the gathering wraps up, the land protectors say they are prepared to face jail and/or fines to protect the mountain and will never leave Hunter's Mountain. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Member 2 First Nation, Unamagi.
A Manitoba RCMP officer is being charged following a police watchdog investigation into an arrest he made last year resulting in a punctured lung. On July 21st of 2024, RCMP Constable Ryan McDonald responded to a shoplifting call in Portage La Prairie, located 80 kilometers west of Winnipeg. A male suspect was later located on a bicycle and soon fled. After he was apprehended and taken into custody, the suspect complained of breathing difficulties and chest pains. The man was transported to hospital and diagnosed with a punctured lung. The Independent Investigation Unit of Manitoba has concluded its more than a year-long investigation and is charging Constable McDonald with 1 count of assault causing bodily harm. The IIU will not be commenting further as the matter is now before the courts. A report into an Indigenous university in Regina has revealed several concerns, with anonymous complaints dating back to June of 2023. The investigation details how the First Nations University of Canada president created a circle of favorites around her, raising questions about leadership and workplace culture. APTN video journalist Rachel May brings us this update.
The First Nations University of Canada in Regina, Saskatchewan is facing scrutiny by the public after a report from professional networking service Deloitte detailing allegations against its president Jacqueline Ottman came to light. The investigation into these allegations found 9 cases of nepotism, 4 cases of poor management, 10 cases of erosion of independent oversight, and 5 cases of financial policy violations, including personally cashing checks. It goes on to state that Ottman's behavior divided staff into in and out groups. The report concluded by saying her behavior is not consistent with effective management and recommended the university's Board of Governors take a more active role until these issues are resolved. The university's Board of Governors Chair Sherry Sayville has issued a statement saying the board has complete confidence in Ottman and stands behind her. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
About 50 people gathered outside the Federal Court of Appeal in downtown Ottawa today. It was to show their support for the Kebaowek First Nation in Quebec and its opposition to a proposed radioactive waste disposal site at Chalk River, about 180 kilometers northwest of the city. Fraser Needham starts us off with this report.
Algonquin elder Claudette Commanda told the crowd Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, CNL, wants to build the site on the shores of the Ottawa River, and this is the last place it should be located.
That we all have a responsibility to protect the river, and there will be no nuclear waste on any of our waters or our land. And let's say that together, water is life.
The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission gave the green light to CNL to build the facility in 2024, but the Kebaowek First Nation took the decision to court and received two favorable rulings. In separate decisions, the court ruled CNL had not met its duty to consult and had violated the Species at Risk Act. CNL asked for a judicial review of both rulings, the first of which, on duty to consult, began on Wednesday in Ottawa. Kebaowek First Nation Chief Lance Heyman had this to say during a break from the hearing.
Inside our courthouse, our legal team is standing up for something simple but powerful, that laws must mean something and promises must be kept. Canada passed a law to implement the United Nations right on Indigenous peoples. Canada passed the Species at Risk Act to protect fragile life and ecosystems. Yet here we are, having to remind the government to follow its own laws. This isn't a court case, it's a test of values.
Both the NDP and Bloc Québécois are supporting Kebaowek and its opposition to the proposed site. NDP MP Leah Gazan said both CNL and government need to live up to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is enshrined in law.
Time and time again, this government says one thing, it's doing another. I'm going to stand to uphold the rule of law, and that includes the right of Indigenous peoples as affirmed through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Bloc Québécois MP Sébastien Lemire added with so much opposition, CNL needs to find another location.
But I think we are on a breaking point. I think the event didn't see is the show, and of course thanks to the First Nation to make this battle, particularly, but it's to the more than 140 municipality towns and was opposed to the project of Chalk River. So the reality now find another site.
The Federal Court of Appeal will hear the application for a judicial review on the violation of the Species at Risk Act on November 12th. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A new report shows First Nations people in Ontario continue to be disproportionately impacted by the opioid crisis. The study, co-authored by researchers at the Chiefs of Ontario and the Ontario Drug Policy Research Network, shows the rate of opioid-related deaths among First Nations people tripled between 2019 and 2022. It also found that during 2022, First Nations people were dying at a rate 9 times higher than non-First Nations people, and that hospital visits due to opioid-related toxicity are also higher among First Nations people. The Chiefs of Ontario are calling for the provincial and federal governments to collaborate with First Nations to create a strategy focused on culturally sensitive and spiritually informed mental health and addiction supports. Regional Chief Abram Benedict is also renewing calls for First Nation policing to be made an essential service.
We do know that many, if not all, of our police services in this region work very closely with external police services. They provide many of the same supports and protections that non-Indigenous agencies would, in fact, with less resources, which is very unfortunate. And so we continue to lobby the federal government to make First Nation policing an essential service. This ties back into organized crime and opiate use in the community. These drugs and the substances are being brought in by many cases by organized crime.
Researchers did find a glimmer of hope in that hospitalization rates have decreased and death rates have stabilized since 2023. A First Nation woman is among those detained by Israeli forces after they intercepted her ship on its way to bring humanitarian aid to Gaza. The Gaza-Israel war has seen more than 66,000 Palestinians killed and hundreds of thousands more starving and displaced since October 7th of 2023, according to the United Nations. Grassroots activist and Salt River First Nation member Misquasin Agnew is part of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition as a passenger aboard the humanitarian vessel known as Conscience. The FFC is attempting to break Israel's naval blockade of Gaza using several ships sailing the Mediterranean Sea to bring much-needed aid to the area. The FFC says early Wednesday morning local time, Agnew's ship was one of 9 intercepted by Israel in international waters. They say a total of 145 non-violent activists from 30 different countries were taken to Israel against their will and are currently being detained. Agnew posted this message on her social media while at sea just days before the interception.
Every day, the Palestinian people live through unspeakable horror and tragedy. I'm here as an act of Indigenous solidarity, that none of us are free until we are all free. We are a crew of medics and journalists. We are unarmed. We only bring medical aid, humanitarian aid, and our consciousness. This is a call to humanity. This is a call to say that we will not leave you alone, Gaza. We will never leave you behind. We're coming for you.
APTN News reached out to the Canadian government for comment. They say 6 Canadians on the flotilla have been detained by Israel and urge Israel to ensure their safety and swift release. Grand Chief Stuart Phillip in BC has been appointed to his position for another term, and Lake St. Martin First Nation in Manitoba has a new judge. Those stories when we come back. Thanks for staying with us. A member of Lake St. Martin First Nation in Manitoba has become the latest judge to be sworn in within the provincial court system. Judge Jerry Lee Ryle has been on the bench since May, but a ceremonial swearing in took place recently with her family, friends, community, and peers all in attendance. Here is part of her acceptance speech that reflects on how her Anishinaabe traditions were once illegal in a system she's now fully embraced.
Papate wizi magazine agabi wanang episode na Indigenous Makadudem Bashkadang Dunji.
I, Jerry Lee Ryle of the City of Winnipeg in the province of Manitoba, do solemnly swear in the presence of and while holding this eagle feather.
It was important for me that I opened my remarks in the language that should have been my first language, that I introduced myself in a way that I should have been born into instead of reclaiming later in life. This loss of language, culture, and ultimately identity are prominent features in the legacy of colonization. The prohibition on Indigenous cultural practices and ceremonies was in fact legislated by law. From 1884 until 1951, Section 149 of the Indian Act prohibited the practice of ceremonies. The healing practices that could have helped deal with the trauma of forced displacement and the residential school systems were rendered illegal. Due process was not available to Indigenous peoples under the Indian Act, as Section 141 prohibited the hiring of lawyers without permission of the Department of Indian Affairs. That section remained in effect until 1951. I highlight this to show the evolution of law, how law changes to reflect the values of society, and to show how far we have collectively come as a country. It wasn't that long ago that the only acceptable place for an Indigenous person to be in a courtroom was in the prisoner's box. It took the voices of brave leaders of Gitchadag. I am not the first Indigenous judge. The Honourable Murray Sinclair Abun was Manitoba's first. I'm also not the first Indigenous female to hold this position. The Honourable Judge Redhead, who I'm now honoured to call a colleague and friend, became Manitoba's first Indigenous female judge when she was appointed in 2007 in Thompson. I am deeply aware that I walk in the footsteps of those who paved the way. I hope that in some small way my contribution helps light the path forward for those who come next. The core values of respect, love, courage, honesty, wisdom, humility, and truth are the foundation of a strong and just society. When these values are upheld, they create space for healing, unity, and meaningful reconciliation that benefits everyone. What I carry into this honorable position are these lived experiences, teachings, and values that have shaped me and that will continue to guide my path forward as I duly, faithfully, and to the best of my knowledge and ability, perform and fulfill the duties and requirements of the office of Judge of the Provincial Court of Manitoba. Miigwech.
A big congratulations to Judge Ryle and her family, and thanks to T.R. Wheatley for preparing that report. The Union of BC Indian Chiefs voted for their next president at their annual general meeting recently in Vancouver. And once again, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip was acclaimed as president for his 10th three-year term. Drummers welcomed him in as he celebrated his latest victory. Throughout his career, he has stood shoulder to shoulder with land defenders across BC from the Okanagan to Burnaby Mountain, where he was arrested in protest of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. This will be his last term before going into retirement. He reflected on his time with the organization and what it meant for him and his wife Joan.
This organization represents, and my entire life has been a consequence of Joan and I finding each other. And what brought us together was the movement. What has sustained our marriage was the movement. And we will end our journey still being part of the movement.
Congrats, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip. A podcast in Saskatchewan is giving people a safe space to talk about addictions. That story and more when we come back. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. To use Greg Scriver's own words, this picture shows an amazing, perfect golden orange mirror image over the ponds of Petrie Island in Ottawa. We totally agree, Greg. Those clouds do look like feathers. Thank you, Greg, for thinking of us and sending us this picture. Send us your photos to share at aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Time now for tomorrow's weather forecast. On the East Coast, Charlottetown 9, Halifax 10 and sunny. The Grand River 7, Nuujjuaq 5. Saguenay 8, Quebec City 11 and sunny. Ottawa 14, Windsor 16. 13 in Timmins, Sioux Lookout 15 and partly cloudy. Pucktawagan 10, Norway House 12 and sunny. Gimli partly cloudy and 17, Princess Harbour 19. Estevan 19, Saskatoon 18. Meadow Lake 14, La Ronge 11 and sunny there. 13 in Peace River, Fort McMurray 11. Calgary 15, Medicine Hat 19. Kamloops 22, Vancouver 15. 14 in Prince Rupert, Fort Nelson 17. Beaver Creek 4, Watson Lake 11. 8 in Wati, Fort Simpson 12 and sunny. Sax Harbor 0, Colville Lake 6. Baker Lake rain and 6, Chesterfield 5 and partly cloudy. And Clyde River -2, Igloolik -1. Hard Knocks Talks, a podcast that discusses the realities of struggling with addiction, is hosting their second annual Battle for Recovery event. The event is a gathering where stories will be shared to remind everyone they don't have to battle alone. Creator of the Hard Knocks Talks podcast, Daniel Hearn, says he and his wife Donna started the podcast to create a safe space for people to share their experiences with addiction, homelessness, child apprehension, and the court system. The podcast invites guests from all walks of life to show that recovery is possible. The second annual Saskatoon Battle for Recovery brings those stories from online to in person to build connections and provide a safe space for healing. Hearn says addiction isn't talked about enough, and this event is a place for real stories to be shared.
But we don't come up there just to share horror stories. We share these challenges that we faced in an effort to sort of qualify us to understand that, like, hey, like if we can pull ourselves out of this chaos, out of this darkness, out of, you know, the abuses, the gang life, the incarceration, all of the things, then maybe you can too. And then maybe you can at least join the conversation and learn more about how we did it.
The event is set to take place this Friday on October 10th at Saskatoon's TCU Place. The world premiere of Eternal Gestures, an experimental new dance work, gives a voice to three matriarchs of the West Coast contemporary dance scene and explores our deep connection to the land. With more, here's Ryan Cunningham.
Star Marenko, Michelle Olsen, and Margaret Grenier have been creating work in Vancouver for years, but this is the first time they've been commissioned to choreograph a solo dance piece for the same dancer.
You know, the invitation came from Alvin, and then all of us pretty much right away said yes, and, you know, saw what an opportunity and what a gift it would be to do this.
Alvin Torrentino, an Asian-Canadian dance artist, celebrating his company's 25th anniversary, chose these three choreographers to have a conversation through dance.
I think that the reason why the three pieces come together so beautifully is that they really look at different parts of what it means to be a visitor within a space, what those relationships that bring us to land and place are, what the histories are that we carry with us, but also what it is that we acknowledge about the land that we're on.
None of the choreographers were involved in each other's work, yet a common theme of home emerged immediately.
So we all worked separately with him, but then we all came in the studio together to share the three solos, and I think all of us right away, we were struck by all of the threads and common themes, and as Margaret was saying, it was like we were all responding to the question through movement and through our creative process, and with Alvin interpreting it, and so we all saw that they were all connected. For my piece in particular, we focused a lot on what home meant, and that sense of, you know, where our birth home is, our ancestral home, where is our current home, and our relationship to that land. And as Margaret said, what does it mean to be a guest in another's territory?
The world premiere of Eternal Gestures from Company Erasga is this Thursday and Friday, October 9th and 10th, at 8 p.m. at the Scotiabank Theatre in Vancouver. Ryan Cunningham, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Thank you, Ryan. And that's your evening newscast for this Wednesday, October 8th. We're back with your daytime newscast tomorrow. Please join us then. And to read and watch our stories you may have missed, go to aptnnews.ca. From our HQ in downtown Winnipeg, Masi Cho Mi Gwech Hai Hai. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time.